The wind screamed like a dying animal outside Jake Morrison's cabin. He sat by the small fire, listening to the storm tear across the mountains of Kilo 7. The wooden walls shook with each gust. Snow piled higher against the windows every hour. Jake had lived alone on this planet for 3 years. He chose this place because no one else wanted it. The weather was too harsh. The mountains were too dangerous. Most people stayed in the warm valleys near the spaceport, but Jake liked the quiet. He liked being alone. He was a big man with rough hands and a thick beard. His brown hair was getting gray at the sides. Deep lines marked his face from years of worry and sun. He had been a soldier once, but that was before. Before he lost his friends. Before he decided he was done with fighting. The storm had been going for 6 hours now. Jake checked his weather radio again. The voice crackled through the static. Storm. Warning continues for the northern mountains. Winds now at 200 kilometers per hour. Temperature dropping to minus 40 degrees. All aircraft grounded. All travel banned. Jake turned off the radio. He had enough food for a week. His cabin was strong. The thick stone walls and metal roof could handle anything the planet threw at him. He had built it himself, using his old engineering skills. Every beam was locked in place. Every joint was sealed tight. He stirred the pot of soup hanging over the fire. The smell of meat and vegetables filled the small room. Outside, something metal banged against the cabin wall. Probably his tool shed losing pieces in the wind. He would fix it tomorrow if the storm passed. Jake pulled his book from the shelf. It was an old story about Earth, from before humans came, to the stars. He liked reading about the old world. Simple times when the biggest worry was rain, not alien wars or space pirates. The fire popped and crackled. Heat spread through the single room that was his home. His bed sat in one corner. His kitchen took up another wall. Books filled a third corner. His tools and weapons hung on the fourth wall. Everything he needed fit in this one space. A loud crash made him look up from his book. That was not the tool shed. Something heavy had hit his door. Jake set down the book and walked to the window. He could see nothing through the thick snow. The wind howled even louder. Bang, 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 something was hitting his door on purpose. Jake grabbed his rifle from the wall. Wild animals sometimes came down from the high peaks during bad storms. The cold made them desperate. Hungry bears could break through weak doors, but the banging was not random. It had a pattern. 3 hits, then a pause. 3 more hits. Someone was knocking. Jake looked through the small window next to the door. He could barely see through the snow. A dark shape moved near his steps. It was too small to be a bear, too big to be a mountain cat. "Hello?" Jake called through the door. "Who's there?" A voice answered. But the words were strange. Not English. Not any language Jake knew. The voice sounded young and scared. And definitely not human. Jake's hand tightened on his rifle. In 3 years on Kilo 7, he had never seen any aliens. The planet was supposed to be empty except for human settlers, but the voice outside his door proved that wrong. The knocking came again. Weaker this time. Whoever was out there was getting tired, or dying from the cold. Jake made his choice. He set down the rifle and opened the door. Wind and snow blasted into his cabin. A small figure fell forward onto his floor. Jake quickly shut the door and locked it. He turned to look at his unexpected visitor. She was definitely not human. The creature on his floor was about the size of a human woman, but her skin had a blue tint like winter ice. Her hair was white as fresh snow, and her eyes were the color of deep purple flowers. Strange marks glowed softly on her arms and face. They pulsed like a slow heartbeat, shifting from blue to purple to silver. She wore clothes that looked like they were made from plant fibers. They were torn and wet from the storm. Blood showed through a rip in her pants where something had cut her leg. The alien woman saw Jake looking at her. Her glowing mark suddenly flashed bright red. She scrambled backward until she hit the wall. Her purple eyes went wide with terror. She spoke in her strange language, but Jake did not need to understand the words. Her voice was high and frightened. She was begging. Maybe for her life. Jake had heard stories about aliens. Some people said they were all dangerous. Others said they were peaceful. But looking at this scared, hurt creature in his cabin, Jake saw only someone who needed help. He slowly raised both hands, palms out. He took a step back to give her more space. "It's okay," he said in a soft voice. "I won't hurt you." She did not understand his words, but his tone seemed to calm her a little. The red glow in her marks faded to orange, then yellow. Jake pointed to himself. "Jake," he said clearly. Then he pointed to her and raised his eyebrows in a question. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she touched her chest. "Lyra," she whispered. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, two very different beings had just taken their first step toward understanding each other. Jake looked at the blood on Lyra's leg and knew what he had to do. Storm or no storm, alien or not, someone was hurt and needed help. He pointed to her injured leg, then to his medical kit on the wall. Lyra followed his gaze and seemed to understand. She nodded slowly, though fear still showed in her purple eyes. Jake Morrison had spent 3 years running from other people. Tonight, the storm had brought someone to him who might need him more than he needed to be alone. Jake moved slowly toward his medical kit. Every step made Lyra tense up more. Her glowing marks flashed between yellow and orange like warning lights. He could see she was ready to run even though she had nowhere to go. He stopped halfway across the room. This was not working. She was too scared of him. Jake sat down on the floor, making himself smaller and less threatening. He pulled the medical kit toward him and opened it where she could see everything inside. Bandages, medicine bottles, clean cloth, nothing that looked like a weapon. Lyra watched him with those huge purple eyes. Her breathing was fast and shallow. The cut on her leg was still bleeding, making a small red spot on his wooden floor. Jake picked up a roll of white bandages. He held it up so she could see it clearly. Then he pointed to her leg and made wrapping motions with his hands. He repeated, this 3 times, moving very slowly. Lyra's marks shifted to a softer yellow. She seemed to understand what he wanted to do, but fear still held her back. The storm outside grew worse. The cabin shook as wind hit it like a giant fist. Snow piled against the windows until they were completely covered. The temperature inside dropped as cold air leaked through tiny gaps. Jake stood up carefully and added more wood to the fire. The flames grew higher, pushing warmth back into the room. He noticed Lyra shivering. Her strange clothes were still wet from the storm. He went to his closet and pulled out a thick blanket. It was made from the fur of mountain animals he had hunted for food. Warm and dry. He held it up so Lyra could see it, then set it on the floor between them. Lyra looked at the blanket, then at Jake. Slowly, she reached out and touched the soft fur. Her marks glowed a gentle blue. The first time Jake had seen that color. Maybe blue meant she was feeling better. Jake pointed to the blanket, then to her. He made rapping motions again. After a moment, Lyra pulled the blanket around her shoulders. She stopped shivering. Now for the hard part. Jake picked up a bottle of medicine and a clean cloth. He showed them to Lyra, then pointed to her bleeding leg. She pulled back against the wall. Jake had an idea. He took out his pocket knife and made a small cut on his own hand. Nothing deep, just enough to draw a little blood. Lyra's eyes went wide, and her marks flashed red again. But Jake ignored her fear. He cleaned his small cut with the medicine and wrapped it with a bandage. He held up his hand to show her the clean white bandage, then pointed to her leg again. Understanding dawned in Lyra's purple eyes. The red glow faded from her marks. She looked at her injured leg, then at Jake's bandaged hand. Slowly, very slowly, she stretched out her leg toward him. Jake moved like he was approaching a wild animal. One wrong move and she would panic again. He cleaned the blood away first, being as gentle as possible. Lyra made a soft sound when the medicine touched her cut, but she did not pull away. The wound was not too deep. Something sharp had sliced through her strange clothes and cut the skin, but it would heal quickly with proper care. Jake worked in silence, cleaning and bandaging with practiced skill. When he finished, Lyra examined the white bandage on her leg. She touched it carefully, then looked up at Jake. For the first time, her marks glowed a warm green color. She said something in her language, just a few words, but her voice was softer now. Jake thought she might be saying thank you. He cleaned up the medical supplies and put them away. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin felt warmer and more peaceful. Lyra was still wrapped in the blanket sitting against the wall. She watched Jake move around the room, but she no longer looked ready to run. Jake's stomach rumbled loudly. He had not eaten dinner yet. The soup was still hanging over the fire, smelling good and ready to eat. He looked at Lyra and pointed to the pot, then to his mouth. She tilted her head, not understanding. Jake got 2 bowls from his kitchen. He filled one with soup and sat down to eat it, making sure Lyra could see what he was doing. The hot soup tasted good after the cold and stress of the evening. He filled the second bowl and set it on the floor between them. Then he pointed to Lyra and made eating motions. Lyra stared at the bowl for a long time. Her marks shifted through different colors, yellow, blue, orange, then back to blue. She was thinking hard about something. Finally, she reached out and picked up the bowl. She sniffed the soup carefully, then took a small sip. Her eyes widened in surprise. She took a bigger sip, then another. Jake smiled. Apparently, his cooking was not too strange for alien taste buds. They ate in comfortable silence. The fire crackled and warmed the room. Outside, the storm showed no signs of stopping. Jake checked his weather radio again. Storm continues to strengthen. Winds now at 220 kilometers per hour. Heavy snow expected through tomorrow night. Emergency services suspended until conditions improve. Jake turned off the radio and looked at Lyra. She had finished her soup and was holding the empty bowl in her lap. Her marks glowed a steady, peaceful blue. It looked like they would be spending more time together. Jake pointed to himself and said Jake again. Then he pointed to her. Lyra, she said more clearly this time. Jake smiled and nodded. Then he pointed around the cabin, to the fire, to the walls, to the door. Home, he said. Lyra repeated the word carefully. Home. Jake pointed outside, where the storm raged. He made a scary face and waved his hands. Bad. Dangerous. Lyra nodded quickly. She seemed to understand that word very well. Jake pointed to the inside of the cabin, then made a peaceful, calm expression. Safe, safe, Lyra repeated. Her marks glowed brighter blue. They were starting to communicate. It was simple and basic, but it was working. Jake felt something he had not felt in years, the satisfaction of helping someone who really needed it. The night was still young and the storm was still strong, but Jake no longer minded being trapped in his cabin. For the first time in 3 years, he was not alone. And maybe, just maybe, being alone had not been as good for him as he thought. Lyra settled back against the wall, still wrapped in the warm blanket. Her eyes grew heavy as the heat from the fire and the food in her stomach made her sleepy, but she fought to stay awake, watching Jake with careful attention. Jake understood. She still did not completely trust him. That was smart. Trust had to be earned, especially between two very different species who had never met before. He would prove to her that some humans could be trusted, even if it took all night. Jake woke up when something bright flashed in the cabin. He had fallen asleep in his chair by the fire. The flames had burned low during the night and cold air filled the room. Lyra was sitting up against the wall, her marks pulsing with urgent, orange light. She was looking toward the door with fear in her purple eyes. The storm outside had not stopped. If anything, it sounded worse than before. Wind screamed around the cabin like angry spirits. Something heavy crashed against the roof, probably a tree branch torn loose by the wind. Jake stood up slowly, trying not to scare Lyra. He added wood to the fire and stirred it back to life. Warm light filled the room again. Lyra's marks shifted from orange to yellow as she relaxed a little. Bad storm, Jake said, pointing outside. He had learned that simple words worked best with her. Bad, Lyra agreed. Her voice was soft but clear. Jake made breakfast, eggs from his chickens and bread he had baked 2 days ago. He offered some to Lyra, and she accepted it gratefully. They were getting used to sharing meals. As they ate, Jake noticed Lyra watching his movements carefully. She seemed to be learning about him the same way he was learning about her. When he moved slowly and calmly, her marks stayed blue or green. When he moved too quickly, they flashed yellow. After breakfast, Jake had an idea. He got a piece of paper and a pencil from his desk. He drew a simple picture of a man. Just stick lines for arms and legs, a circle for a head. He pointed to himself and then to the drawing. Jake, he said. Lyra studied the drawing. Then she took the pencil from him. Her drawing was much better than his. Smooth lines that showed a female figure with long hair and marks on the arms and face. She pointed to herself. Lyra. Jake smiled and nodded. Then he drew more pictures. A house with smoke coming from the chimney, mountains around it. He pointed to his cabin and then to the drawing. Lyra understood. She drew her own pictures on the back of the paper. Her people lived in tall, thin buildings that looked like they grew from the ground like trees. Beautiful curved lines showed bridges connecting the buildings high in the air. Jake was amazed. Her city looked like something from a dream. Lyra drew more pictures. Her people had blue skin like hers, with the same glowing marks. But in her drawings, they lived in harmony with nature. Trees and plants grew right through their buildings. Animals walked freely in their streets. Jake drew pictures of human cities, square buildings, straight roads, metal and concrete everywhere. When Lyra saw these, her marks flashed red for a moment. She pointed to his drawings and shook her head. Bad? Jake asked. Lyra nodded sadly. Bad. Jake understood. His people and her people lived very differently. Humans changed the world to fit their needs. Her people changed themselves to fit the world. He drew another picture, himself alone in his cabin with no other buildings around. Trees and mountains surrounded his home. Animals came close without fear. This was how he lived now. Lyra studied this drawing for a long time. Her marks shifted through many colors: yellow, blue, green, purple. Finally, they settled on a warm green. She pointed to the drawing and then to Jake. Good, she said. Jake felt proud. She approved of how he lived. They spent the morning drawing and learning. Jake learned that Lyra's people were called Zephyrians. They had lived on this planet long, before humans came. They stayed hidden in the deep forests and high mountains, watching the human settlements from far away. Lyra learned that Jake had been a soldier. He drew pictures of battles, of friends who died, of the sadness that made him leave his old life. When she saw these drawings, her marks glowed with soft blue light. She touched his hand gently. She understood pain. In the afternoon, Jake tried to learn more about why Lyra was alone in the storm. She drew pictures that showed her with a group of other Zephyrians. They were watching human settlements from hiding places in the forest. Then she drew herself running away from the group. Her marks flashed red and orange as she remembered. Jake drew a question mark. Why did she run? Lyra's drawings became angry and sad. She drew herself with a male Zephyrian who had darker marks. The male's marks were drawn in black pencil, angry and threatening. She drew herself trying to get away from him, but other Zephyrians holding her back. Jake began to understand. Someone had tried to force her to be with this male. She had run away to escape. He drew himself leaving his soldier friends, running away to live alone. He pointed to both drawings. Same, he said. Lyra's eyes widened. Her marks glowed bright, blue. Same, she repeated. They were both refugees from their own people. Both had chosen loneliness over staying in situations that hurt them. As the day continued, they learned more about each other. Jake showed Lyra his books, his tools, his simple way of life. She showed him how her marks changed colors with her feelings: blue for calm, green for happy, yellow for worried, orange for scared, red for angry or terrified. She also showed him that her marks could glow brighter when she needed light. In the afternoon, when clouds made the cabin dark, Lyra made her marks shine like soft lamps. It was beautiful and useful. Jake showed her his emergency radio. When voices came through speaking human languages, Lyra's marks flashed with interest. She was trying to understand the words. That evening, as they shared another meal, Jake had a thought. He got his emergency beacon, a small device that could send light signals to aircraft or rescue teams. He made it flash in different patterns. Lyra watched with growing excitement. Her marks began to pulse in response to the beacon's flashes. She was trying to talk with light. Jake realized this was how her people communicated over long distances. The marks on their skin were not just for showing emotions. They were a language. He made simple patterns with the beacon. Flash, flash, pause, flash, pause, flash. Different rhythms and timing. Lyra responded with her marks, creating complex patterns of colored light. Soon they were having a conversation. In light, even though Jake could only make simple signals. It was like learning to write all over again. But it was working. As the second night fell, Jake and Lyra sat by the fire, comfortable with each other. The storm still raged outside, but Inside the cabin felt warm and peaceful. Jake realized something important. For 3 years, he had thought he wanted to be alone. He had thought other people would only bring trouble and pain, but spending time with Lyra, someone so different from him but also so similar, made him feel more human than he had in years. Maybe running away had not solved his problems. Maybe it had just hidden them. Lyra seemed to be thinking similar thoughts. She kept looking at Jake with her purple eyes, and her marks glowed with peaceful blue light. She was not afraid of him anymore. In fact, she seemed to trust him completely. Tomorrow, if the storm ended, they would have to make difficult choices. Lyra's people would be looking for her. Jake's isolation would be discovered. Their peaceful time together might end. But tonight, they had found something neither had expected. They had found friendship across the vast gap between species. And they had learned that loneliness, while safe, was not the same thing as peace. The fire crackled softly as both human and Zephyrian settled down to sleep. Outside, the storm began to weaken. By morning, the world would be different again. Jake woke to silence. After 3 days of howling wind, the sudden quiet felt strange. He looked toward the window and saw sunlight coming through the snow that had covered the glass. The storm was over. Lyra was already awake, sitting by the window and looking outside with worried eyes. Her marks pulsed with nervous yellow light. She knew what the end of the storm meant. Her people would come looking for her. Jake cleared snow away from the window so they could see outside. The world looked completely different. Snow-covered, everything in smooth white curves. Trees bent under the weight of ice. The path to his cabin had disappeared under 3 feet of fresh snow. Lyra pointed outside and made worried sounds in her language. Her marks flashed between yellow and orange. Something was wrong. Jake turned on his emergency radio and scanned through the frequencies. Static filled most channels, but on one he heard a faint signal. Not human voices. Something else. Strange. Sounds that seemed to have a pattern. Lyra jumped up when she heard the sounds. Her marks flashed bright red. She grabbed Jake's arm and pointed at the radio, speaking rapidly in her language. Jake did not understand her words, but her fear was clear. Those sounds on the radio were important. Lyra ran to the paper they had used for drawing. She sketched, quickly. Several Zephyrians trapped in what looked like a cave. Lines around them showed falling rocks. Wavy lines came from the ground. She pointed to the radio, then to her drawing, then outside toward the mountains. Jake began to understand. Those sounds on the radio were distress calls. Lyra's people, the ones she had been traveling with, were trapped somewhere in the mountains. The storm had caught them, and now they were in danger. Jake studied Lyra's drawing more carefully. She had drawn the wavy lines coming up from the ground around the trapped Zephyrians. That looked like gas, probably toxic fumes from underground volcanic vents. During big storms, rock slides sometimes opened new cracks in the mountain that let dangerous gases escape. He had seen it before. Humans caught in those situations died quickly without proper breathing equipment. Jake looked at Lyra's frightened face, then at his equipment on the wall. He had breathing masks, ropes, tools for digging through rock. He had skills from his military days and knowledge of these mountains from 3 years of living here. He could help with a rescue, but helping meant leaving his safe cabin. It meant revealing his location to both humans and Zephyrians. It meant ending his peaceful isolation forever. Jake thought about this for maybe 10 seconds. Then he started pulling rescue equipment from his storage. Lyra watched him with wide purple eyes. Her marks shifted from red to yellow to blue as she realized what he was doing. She had not asked him to help. She knew it would cost him his quiet life. But he was doing it anyway. Jake packed breathing masks, medical supplies, digging tools, and rope into a large backpack. He dressed in his warmest clothes and waterproof boots. The snow outside was deep, but he had snowshoes for walking. On top of it, he tried to explain to Lyra that she should stay in the warm cabin. The journey would be dangerous, and she was still healing from her injured leg. But Lyra shook her head firmly. She pointed to herself, then to the drawing of the trapped Zephyrians, then back to herself. Her people would be terrified if they saw a human coming to help them. They needed her to translate and explain. Jake understood. He found extra warm clothes that might fit her and helped her prepare for the journey. They left the cabin an hour after sunrise. The snow was deep, but Jake's snowshoes let them walk on top of it. Lyra struggled at first, but she learned quickly. Her people seemed to be naturally good at moving through difficult terrain. Jake used the radio signal to guide their direction. The distress calls came from somewhere high in the eastern mountains, about 5 kilometers from his cabin. In good weather, it would be a 2-hour walk. In deep snow, with an injured companion, it would take much longer. They climbed steadily through the white wilderness. Jake broke trail while Lyra followed in his footsteps. Every hour they stopped to rest and listen to the radio. The distress signals were getting weaker. Time was running out. After 4 hours of hard climbing, they reached a steep valley between 2 peaks. Jake could smell something wrong in the air, a sharp, bitter scent that meant volcanic gases were escaping from underground. Lyra's marks flashed red with alarm. She pointed up the valley toward a dark opening in the rock face. Cave entrance. The distress signals were coming from that direction. As they got closer, Jake could see the problem. A rock slide had partially blocked the cave entrance. Loose rocks, and snow had fallen across the opening, leaving only a small gap at the top. The toxic smell was much stronger here. Jake put on his breathing mask and gave another one to Lyra. He explained with hand signals how to use it. The masks would protect them from the poisonous gases, but they had to move fast. They climbed up the rocky slope to the cave entrance. Jake could hear sounds from inside, weak calls for help in the Zephyrian language. At least some of them were still alive. Jake examined the rock slide carefully. Moving the wrong stones could bring down more rocks and seal the cave completely. But he had training in this kind of rescue work. He knew which rocks were supporting the others and which ones could be moved safely. He started working with his tools, moving stones one at a time. Lyra helped by carrying away the smaller rocks. Her marks glowed bright blue. She was working hard, but she seemed hopeful now. After an hour of careful digging, they had opened a gap big enough for people to crawl through. Jake shined his flashlight into the cave. 3 Zephyrians lay on the cave floor. Their skin looked pale blue instead of the healthy color of Lyra's skin. Their marks barely glowed at all. The toxic gases had been slowly poisoning them, but they were alive. When the trapped Zephyrians saw Jake's light, they made frightened sounds and tried to move away. Even dying, they were terrified of the human who had come to help them. Lyra crawled into the cave first. She spoke to her people in their own language, her marks flashing with urgent blue and green patterns. Jake heard his name several times as she explained who he was and why he was there. Slowly, the trapped Zephyrians stopped trying to get away from Jake. They were too weak to move much anyway, but their marks shifted from red fear to yellow uncertainty. Jake crawled into the cave and began checking each Zephyrian for injuries. 2 of them had breathing problems from the gas, but would recover with fresh air and rest. The 3rd had a broken arm from falling rocks. Getting them out of the cave was the hardest part. Jake had to carry each one through the narrow gap he had dug, then help them down the rocky slope to safer ground. With every rescue, he proved to the Zephyrians that humans could be trusted. By the time he carried the last one to safety, their marks were glowing with grateful green light. As the sun began to set, Jake and Lyra helped the rescued Zephyrians back toward his cabin. They moved slowly because of injuries and weakness, but they were alive. Jake realized his quiet life was over. Tomorrow, both human and Zephyrian search teams would find his cabin. His secret refuge would become a meeting place between 2 species. But, looking at the grateful faces of the people he had saved, Jake felt something he had not experienced in years. He felt useful. He felt like his skills and knowledge had made a real difference. Maybe ending his isolation was not a loss. Maybe it was a chance to become the person he had always wanted to be. The rescued Zephyrians spent the night in Jake's cabin. It was crowded with 5 people in the small space, but no one complained. Jake gave up his bed to the one with the broken arm and slept by the fire. During the night, he woke several times to check on his patients. Each time, he found Lyra awake too, watching over her people with gentle blue light glowing from her marks. She had appointed herself as translator between Jake and the others. By morning, the injured Zephyrians were feeling much better. Fresh air and warmth had cleared the poison from their lungs. Jake's medical care had set the broken arm properly. Most importantly, their fear of him had faded completely. One of the rescued Zephyrians was an older female named Vera. Her marks showed patterns that Jake had learned meant respect and gratitude. Through Lyra's translation, Vera told Jake that her people had been wrong about humans. At least, they had been wrong about him. The other 2 were younger males named Ken and Paul. They spoke little, but their marks glowed with friendly green, light whenever they looked at Jake. They helped him prepare breakfast and clean the cabin, working together despite not sharing a common language. Around midday, they heard aircraft approaching. Jake looked out the window and saw 2 different types of flying vehicles circling his cabin. One was a human rescue helicopter. The other was something he had never seen before, a smooth, curved aircraft that looked like it was grown rather than built. A Zephyrian ship. Both species had come looking for their missing people. Jake felt nervous as the aircraft landed near his cabin. His 3 years of peace and quiet were definitely over. But Lyra squeezed his hand gently, her marks glowing with encouraging blue light. "Good," she said in her careful English. "You good human." The first people through his door were human rescue workers he recognized from the settlement. Behind them came 3 Zephyrians who moved like they were ready for a fight. Their marks flashed warning colors. But when they saw their rescued friends safe and healthy in Jake's cabin, everything changed. Vera spoke to the newcomers in rapid Zephyrian language. Her marks pulsed with complex patterns of light. Jake heard his name mentioned many times. The angry red glow faded from the rescue team's marks, replaced by curious yellow, then grateful green. Captain Lisa Brooks led the human rescue team. She was a tough woman in her 40s who had known Jake before. He became a hermit. "Jake Morrison," she said with a mix of surprise and relief. We've been looking for you for 3 years, and we've been looking for our alien friends here for 3 days." She looked around the crowded cabin, taking in the mixed group of humans and Zephyrians sharing food and space peacefully. "Looks like you found each other first." Over the next few hours, Jake's cabin became an impromptu meeting place between the two species. Captain Brooks called her superiors to report the first peaceful contact with the Zephyrians. The Zephyrian rescue team sent messages to their leaders about the human who had saved their people. Through Lyra's translation, both sides began to share information. The Zephyrians explained that they had been watching human settlements for months, trying to decide if humans were a threat to their hidden civilization. The humans explained that they had been wondering if any intelligent alien life existed on Kilo 7. Jake found himself in the middle of these discussions. Both sides trusted him. The humans because they knew his character, the Zephyrians because he had proven himself through his actions. As evening approached, Captain Brooks took Jake aside for a private conversation. "The government is going to want to talk to you," she said. "You're the first human to make peaceful contact with an alien species. That makes you valuable." Jake felt uncomfortable. "I don't want to be valuable. I just want to be left alone." "I know," Captain Brooks said gently. "But things have changed. You can't go back to hiding in the mountains. Too many people know where you are now." She looked at Lyra, who was teaching some human words to the young Zephyrian males. "Besides, I don't think you want to go back to being alone, do you?" Jake watched Lyra laugh at something Ken had said in broken English. Her marks glowed with happy green light. In 4 days, she had become more important to him than 3 years of solitude. "No," he admitted. "I don't think I do." That night, after the rescue teams had left to make their reports, Jake sat with the 5 Zephyrians around his fire. They were planning to return to their hidden city in the morning, but tonight they wanted to celebrate their rescue and their new friendship with a human. Vera the Elder spoke to Jake through Lyra's translation. "She says her people have a choice to make," Lyra explained. "They can stay hidden and afraid, or they can learn to trust humans the way they have learned to trust you." "What does she think they should do?" Jake asked. Lyra spoke with Vera for several minutes, their marks flashing with complex light patterns. Finally, Lyra turned back to Jake. "She thinks they should try, but only if you help them." "Me? What can I do?" "You can be the bridge," Lyra said. "Your people trust you. My people trust you. You could help both sides learn about each other slowly and safely." Jake thought about this. It meant giving up his hermit life completely. It meant dealing with governments and officials and all the complications he had been avoiding. It meant taking responsibility for the future of 2 civilizations. But it also meant working with Lyra. It meant using his skills to build something good instead of just hiding from the world. It meant having a purpose again. "What about you?" he asked Lyra. "Would you stay to help?" Lyra's marks glowed bright blue. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I stay with you." The next morning, Jake's life changed completely. Official delegations arrived from both the human government and the Zephyrian Council. His small cabin became the site of the first formal meeting between the 2 species. Jake found himself appointed as an unofficial ambassador and translator. With Lyra's help, he began organizing regular meetings between small groups from both sides. They started with simple things, sharing food, teaching each other words, showing how their different technologies worked. Over the following weeks, Jake's cabin was expanded into a small outpost. Buildings for both humans and Zephyrians were added. designed to blend with the natural environment the way Zephyrian architecture did. It became a place where both species could meet safely and learn about each other. Jake discovered he was good at this work. His military training helped him organize complex meetings. His engineering skills helped design buildings that both species found comfortable. His patient personality helped calm tensions when misunderstandings occurred. Most importantly, his friendship with Lyra showed both sides that cooperation was possible. 6 months later, Jake stood outside the expanded outpost, watching human children and young Zephyrians play together in the snow. They had invented games that worked for both species, laughing in a mixture of languages and light patterns. Lyra joined him, her marks glowing with peaceful blue light. "Do you miss your quiet life?" she asked in much improved English. Jake thought about it. "Sometimes," he said honestly. "But this is better." Better? Yes. Being alone was safe, but it was also empty. This. He gestured toward the playing children, the mixed groups of adults sharing conversation and knowledge, the buildings that showed both human and Zephyrian design influences. "This is alive." Lyra's marks shifted to warm green. "Alive is good." "Alive is very good," Jake agreed. That evening, as he had every night for 6 months, Jake sent a report to both governments about the day's progress. Relations between humans and Zephyrians were growing stronger. Trade agreements were being discussed. Scientific knowledge was being shared. A few mixed couples were even talking about marriage. None of it would have happened if a frightened alien woman had not fled into his cabin to escape a blizzard. Jake had spent 3 years running away from other people, thinking that solitude would heal his pain. But it took meeting someone completely different from himself to learn that healing came from connection, not isolation. As he finished his report and prepared for bed, Jake smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new meetings, new opportunities. To build bridges between worlds. He was no longer alone, and he never wanted to be again. Outside his window, the lights of the expanding outpost twinkled like stars. Human technology and Zephyrian bioluminescence created a beautiful glow against the mountain darkness. It was the light of hope for both species, burning bright in the wilderness where Jake Morrison had once hidden from the world.